So Friday, there is a budget, stopgap budget bill that is going through or is going to be put before Congress. Is that going to include the waiver for General Mattis?
It may. I don't know the particulars right now, but I am very heartened to see people like Leon Panetta, former CIA chief and defense secretary for President Obama, come forward and say he thinks that General Mattis should be granted the waiver.
Are you guys pushing for that to be part of that bill and get this thing done on Friday?
We think that sooner is better because, as you know, Martha, that when you start to form your government and make these significant cabinet picks, and this, of course, is the Secretary of Defense, very significant, you want some certainty in the process, and you want to know what the prospects are of denial or approval of these different nominees. I mean, everyone who talks about General Mattis has glowing reviews of his performance and certainly how competently and confidently he would execute the role here. It seems like an appropriate ask to have this waiver, and I think that General Mattis is very much in keeping with the Trump vision of the world and frankly, Trump wanting to project strength immediately as the president-elect.
Do you have any feedback from Senator Schumer on any of this yet?
We don't. I know that the president-elect was reaching out to Senator Schumer. Obviously, they're fellow New Yorkers. They know each other well. They're on different sides of the aisle. But we certainly hope that partisanship will not get in the way of our highly qualified nominees for any number of these posts. You know, Martha, it's disappointing that some people are still in this permanent campaign. You see the protesters every day. You hear the hashtag Not My President. You hear people, a lot of folks in the media, frankly, are running stories as if it's October and not December, and that the election isn't over. And I hope that doesn't spill over into some of these Senate confirmation hearings, including vis-a-vis the president-elect and the minority leader, Chuck Schumer.
So would you say the feedback from Chuck Schumer is positive so far? How would you characterize it?
I would characterize it as open and respectful. I would characterize it as two men who care about the government and care about this next administration, a peaceful transfer of power in our great democracy, Martha. I would characterize it as open and as open-minded, but also very welcoming. They're both going to be very honest with each other. I don't think Chuck Schumer and Donald Trump are two people who mince words, and it's just good that they're talking already.
All right, but you can't say whether or not the waiver will be in that bill on Friday.
I cannot say that. That's up to Congress, but we think sooner is better.
All right. So a lot of talk yesterday about Boeing and the future administration's relationship with Boeing. Here is something from an article that came out yesterday morning at 7:30 before Donald Trump tweeted about Boeing and Air Force One. So this came prior to that. It's from the Chicago Tribune, and here's what it says. Count on a mercurial Trump administration to test the Boeing CEO's statesmanship, especially when it comes to dealing with China, a multi-billion-dollar Boeing commercial airline customer. It looks like Trump is eager for a China confrontation. So then, about 40 minutes later or so, Donald Trump puts out this tweet, surprising a lot of people, about the fact that he wants to cancel the order for Boeing to create the next program for Air Force One.
I think that's a coincidence, not causation. And I had spoken with the president-elect actually before that tweet, before he had a great day, frankly, yesterday, and they got the $50 billion commitment from SoftBank in the early afternoon, Martha. And he had been briefed the day before. I mean, this is someone he's absorbing a great deal of information from the powers that be, and he had already been briefed about the cost of the Air Force Ones that were under contract. And as you heard him say, he thinks it's an extraordinary amount of money, that he wants Boeing to make money but not make too much money.
That number's not accurate, that it's $170 million, that there is no deal yet that is worth anywhere near $4 billion. Is that true?
I'm sorry, is what true?
Is the $4 billion number accurate, or is Boeing right that it's about $170-something million and that there's really no paperwork so far on the cost of any of this?
Well, I think that's a technicality. I read a couple of the articles, and nobody thinks that these aircraft are going to cost $170 million. I think they're talking about maybe some of the preliminary work that was done and the price tag that was placed on that, Martha, versus the full complement of aircraft and what that may entail. I did read again just this morning that if you want to reduce the cost, you have to lessen the technical requirements for the aircraft. That makes sense to anybody. But I think Donald Trump's point as the president-elect is the same, which is the taxpayers ought to be paying fair value for things, whatever those are. Yeah. And I don't think anybody can argue with the fact that in our government, the Boeing situation aside, we have countless instances of fraud, waste, and abuse that the taxpayers, the hardworking men and women in this country, are always being asked to pay for. I think it's part of how Donald Trump won, frankly. People, yes, they want to change, but they want change from a system that really isn't accountable for its budgetary items the way you and I are in our households.
I think that's absolutely true in terms of the Air Force One issue. So for the concerns of Boeing, they sold 500 jets internationally last year. A third of those they sold to China, almost $1 trillion contract to sell brand new jets from Boeing to China. Does the Trump administration have any problem with that at all? And might they, in the future, tax or put a tariff on those sales?
Well, we all know how the president-elect feels about every issue that you've just laid out. He's been very clear and concise about that. At the same time, he's not willing to make policy right now before he is the president of the United States, especially in that way. But look, we know what he has said about China. We know what he has said about fairness to the American taxpayer and American worker. And we now know what he has said about the price of aircraft. He's just made himself very clear on those couple of items. And I think it remains to be seen, Martha, how those are woven together in his administration. But at the same time, I think people are just excited that you have a president-elect who's already making good on his promises, not, quote, growing in office, as so many of them do, where they turn tail once they're elected. Yeah. You see it with the carrier deal last week. You know, people are asking me, he's going to these states on his thank you tour that he won. Will he go to states that he didn't win, or that Indiana was not a swing state. He won it by 10 points. He went there last week because that's where the jobs were that needed to stay here as opposed to going to Mexico. And he worked with a private company on a deal that made everybody happy.
All right, Kellyanne, one last thing. He said there'll be appointments, big news, today and tomorrow. You want to give that to us here?
I'll let him give that to you, but I think you may hear about an ambassadorship or two. You may hear about EPA perhaps, or maybe DHS. So that's up to him. He surprises us all when he actually conveys the information, even if we know what the information is. But Martha, I'll tell you, we feel great how ahead of schedule he is when you compare him to past administrations. It was 4 weeks into President-elect Obama's term that he announced his first cabinet pick, Tim Geithner, for Treasury. Yeah. So we feel like we've just got a long, short list for each of these positions that President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect Pence have met with over 70 or 75 men and women, not all of whom will end up in the cabinet, or are they seeking to, but really very appreciative of their counsel, their advice, their experiences, and their vision for this nation. It's been a tremendous experience.